British Olympic runner Amy-Eloise Markovc has plenty to be proud of over the last 2 years. The 27-year-old became European indoor champion for the 3,000 metres back in 2021. She made her Olympic debut in Tokyo, came fourth in the 5,000 metres at the 2022 Commonwealth Games, and she also broke the British 2-mile record in 2021 too. That's just a brief list of some of her achievements. There's many more. And while Amy is understandably proud of her accomplishments in what she calls a crazy last 2 years, there's still a nagging sense of that untapped potential. It's something many athletes can relate to. In this podcast interview, Amy talks about her mission to try and unlock that potential. It's easier said than done after all, with so much of it based on training and coaching changes, as well as learning to protect her own mental energy, a tough balancing act. Amy also shares a pretty mad episode in her life where she almost didn't qualify for the Olympics thanks to some cones. And we also explore the progression of women in sport and why greater research is needed into periods. We hope you enjoy this honest, down-to-earth interview with an athlete who has bags of potential. Amy, very warm welcome to the podcast. As we currently record, it's November time, cold outside, Christmas is approaching, and gearing up for the end of the year as well. But first off, ultimately, how are you?
Oh yeah, thank you for having me on. I'm doing well. I'm kind of in the depths of winter training at the moment. So this week particularly was a very hard week. Enjoying a rest day though at the moment. So yeah, we're doing well. We're just that time of year where you kind of grit your teeth through it. And but I've been enjoying it, and I've been I've had a lot of changes recently as well. So yeah, it's been refreshing in a way, but yeah, just a lot of hard work around this time of year.
Yeah, definitely. And like we were talking just before we started recording about, the change in the weather and what it can do to people. And I imagine, when you consider winter training for yourself and going on those runs, a little bit similar as well. You're just kind of, facing up to the shorter days and the weather at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult time of year for me, mostly because of the short days in terms of recovery between, like, if you're doing an afternoon run or an afternoon shakeout, having enough time between like your morning session and your gym, and then by the time you get home, have something to eat, and then it's like you don't have that long before you have to go out for that second run. So it's hard to fit in that recovery period unless you are comfortable running in the dark. Which I'm usually not. So yeah, I think that's the most difficult thing about this time of year, is just kind of fitting everything into just a condensed day.
Yeah, absolutely. And did I also see there was a first cross-country race relatively recently? I think the weekend's just gone, if I'm counting my days right.
Yeah, I did my first cross-country race since 2017. I did Milton Keynes. I'd never done the course before. And it was just the steep downhills I just couldn't believe. People have fly down those downhills, and so it was a bit of a shock to the system, just getting used to. I've been kind of blessed with a nice flat track for a few years, so just getting used to kind of being out on the cross country course again. But it was really fun. I think it's a great way to break up this time of year, by introducing some cross country races. Gives you something to aim for, and just, like I said, breaks up the winter training a little bit, and gives you something to focus on. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was just a bit of a shock to the system.
Yeah, I was going to say, is it kind of part of the program, or is it a little bit of, I suppose, escapism in a little way from, relentlessly focusing on the track, that you kind of have a little bit of fun out on the side as well?
Right. So, our approach for cross country, so the aim is always for outdoor season. I want to have a good indoor season as well. So it's really hard to kind of go 100% on cross country as well and hit all of those 3 seasons. So our approach to cross country is I want to do well, but at the same time, we're not going to sacrifice the base work that we're doing now, that we need to do for indoor and outdoor season. We're not going to sacrifice that to prepare for cross, or kind of in skipping kind of steps of that base training. So while we are making like certain accommodations for like Liverpool, and then if I did make the European cross team, obviously we're gonna taper a bit for that. But it's more about just training through, and when make a few accommodations, but we're not focusing on it. We're more kind of using it to build in through the next year, and just have a bit of fun along the way.
Complementing it a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of treading that line between like getting that really good base aerobic work in, without adding, the faster stuff in too early, but also having enough kind of turnover in your legs to be able to actually race. So it's kind of just like towing that fine line. But like I said, it's also just to enjoy it. And I haven't had a cross country season in a long time, and my training partner, Millie Bryant, also hasn't. So that's been refreshing for both of us.
Yeah, it definitely sounds refreshing. And like I say, if you're having fun at the same time, then it's only going to complement everything else, isn't it? Particularly with the mindset and things like that.
Yeah. I think as long as you're enjoying things, I think that's the most important thing. And like I said, at Milton Keynes, it wasn't it definitely was my best race ever. It was a bit of a shock to the system, both physically and mentally, and just like being reacquainted with cross country. But I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the whole day regardless. And I think as long as you're taking away that enjoyment from it, it just keeps kind of helps you build momentum, keeps you motivated. So I think that's the number one important thing right now is just if you can enjoy as much of that winter training as possible, then you're going to get a lot more out of it.
Yeah, I think there's a whole bunch of athletes that probably go along with that line of thinking as well. As is only natural, I suppose, when you kind of get towards the end of the year. Everyone does it. They get a little bit reflective, I imagine, looking back on things and looking back on, I suppose, this last couple of years for you as well. I had to write these down so I could actually remember. And it's just kind of a snapshot of those achievements that you've had in the last couple of years. When you think back to the UK Championships in the summer and becoming champion of that in the 5,000 meters, fourth at the Commonwealth in the same event, fifth at the European Championships, and then going back to 2021, and you've got your Olympic appearance, European indoor gold as well for the 3,000 meters, and breaking the British 2 mile record as well. A lot to cram in there, a lot for listeners to kind of digest as well. But kind of to summarize, is there a kind of way that you assess how it's all gone at the moment and kind of where you are at in your journey?
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of take stock of what you've done and not. I think it's really easy as an athlete to just glaze over your successes, and just because you're always aiming for the next thing, and kind of not appreciate the accomplishments when you're doing them. But as I said, I do feel like while I had moments that were really great over the last couple of years, and I felt like I was able to get 100% out of myself, there's also was days where I didn't, and it just didn't come together on the day. And so I think there was, as much as it's been a good 2 years and I have improved, I just know there's so much more untapped potential in there. And I think a lot of athletes would say that. We wouldn't be doing this if we didn't believe we had that untapped potential. So, I think I like really appreciate how I've been able to see that improvement over the next year. But now, like I said, with a lot of changes in terms of my coaching and my setup and everything, it's just I'm really hoping that I'm going to be able to kind of explore some different ways that I can improve in my training and mentally and everything. So I feel I've had a lot of amazing experiences over the past 2 years. I've gone to every major championship there is now, indoors and out, which is amazing. And I think I'm going to be able to take that experience through. So even if I didn't have the best performance at all of those championships, I'm going to be able to learn from those performances. So hopefully next time, if I can qualify the same team, the same championship, I'm going to be able to take that experience forward, and it's only going to make me better in the long run. So yeah, it's been a kind of a crazy 2 years, especially this past year with all the championships. But now, kind of at the end of the year, I'm just thinking about what have I learned, and what can I kind of take forward, and what do I need to change. So
Yeah, I mean, I'll take that last one then that you just mentioned. What do you kind of feel needs to change, or I suppose things that you really want to improve on come 2023?
Yeah, so there's certain things that we're changing in terms of my training, and so there are some things that have worked that we're not going to change too substantially. And there's other things that we're going to be introducing. Like, for instance, I've never really trained at altitude. So we're going to be adding in altitude camps this year. And that could, if I respond well to those, could be a huge benefit. So that's just an example of like a physical one. But I think just taking away from some of the championships where it was a lot of pressure, and maybe I was just kind of, especially with the championships this year, I think by the time I reached Europeans, I was just mentally as well as quite physically exhausted. So I think it's learning ways to kind of protect that mental energy as you're going from kind of competition to competition.
On that note as well, and I mean, we often have conversations with other athletes about the mental side of it, because people can often so often forget how important that side of it as well, on top of the physical side and the training side. And I mean, how has that been kind of these last couple of years to try and, like I say, balance that mental energy? Because, like I say, the summer was pretty relentless in terms of scheduling, when it was just one championship to the next. And then obviously what you mentioned before about almost kind of acknowledging what you actually have done. And maybe it's one of the few things me as a journalist might be able to relate to. Can't relate to a lot of being a professional athlete, I'll be honest, but always looking straight to the next thing. Once you've done one story, or once you've done one championship in your case, rather than actually appreciating what you've done, it's always on to the next thing. And that can maybe be a little bit detrimental.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely naturally inclined to just like move on to the next thing and not kind of really appreciate how cool an achievement was at the time. Like, I would say that that's one of the things I regret about 2021 was I think I came away from Tokyo a bit dissatisfied. And in retrospect, I did what I could on the day in like horrendous conditions. It was like 99% humidity at the time. And it wasn't a big PB, but I did PB, and I did it with half a shoe on. So, in retrospect, I realized like, I did what I could, but I walked away feeling a little dissatisfied. And I think I almost didn't let myself kind of really soak in that experience, because then I was just immediately thinking about the next year, and that we got 3 championships the next year I could focus on. And I think I should have just slowed down for a minute and really like let it sink in, like that I made it to the Olympic Games. And no matter what happens in my career, like I've always done that. And I think it took me almost the end of this year to kind of appreciate that. So I almost wish I'd kind of just taken stock a little bit earlier. But yeah, I have this natural inclination just to kind of move on to the next leg, and just challenge myself in a new way. But I think it is important to like appreciate what you've done, and kind of let that build your confidence, and just kind of enjoy the moment, because that's why we do this.
Yeah, ultimately, it's what fans tune in for as well, so they can enjoy those moments. But then it's one of those, and again, I say it quite regularly, it's so easier said than done. It's all well and good saying enjoy the moment, but actually making your brain believe that and see that. And how's that kind of been to work through it? Is it certain like techniques that you're trying, or kind of just really making that time for yourself to delve into it?
Yeah, I think it's about making time for yourself, and then also just it's almost because a lot of times after we have these championships, at least in athletics, you go to a championship, but then we also have races afterwards. So that almost like, because you're traveling from one thing to the next, and then there's a Diamond League final, whatever there is, you don't have maybe to have as much time for like just socializing between. I think a big part of it is like with letting it just settle in, for me, is just being able to celebrate it with family and friends. And when you can't do that, and you just kind of settle into your normal training routine, and then you dash off to another race, I think that's the important bit for me, is just like having time to just like celebrate it and appreciate it with the people who kind of been there with you from the start. And so I think that's obviously harder to do, like with COVID and everything over the past couple of years. But over this coming year, that's one thing that I think I probably should prioritize, because that social interaction can actually just build you up. It's not just a distraction.
Yeah. And I suppose that kind of leads into my next question, because I've handily written down, have you changed at all? Which is a bit kind of a simplistic way of asking a really, really deep question, but kind of is that one of the main ways, I suppose, you've really developed in the last couple of years?
I would say yes, but also I think as I get older and as I've been training longer, I get more patient. So I think that's patience during actual sessions, like in terms of handling longer runs, longer volumes. Like they don't scare, time passes much more quickly than it used to, I guess, in those situations. But I think when I was younger, I loved running, but I loved racing and I loved competing, and that was why I did it. And so I did the training so that I could compete. Whereas now I love racing, obviously, don't get me wrong, but I enjoy training much more. And maybe that's something in 2020 that it like kind of forced out of us, was just to really appreciating the long runs, and even the things I used to hate were like long runs and tempos, and now I thrive off of them. And I enjoy the feeling that I get when I'm doing them, and I enjoy the feeling that I have when I finish them. So I think it's just even appreciating just the everyday run, and I would say 97% of the time, like I really want to get out the door and I want to do it. And I think that's the difference, because old me like always wanted to race, and what like the speed workouts and like thing, but didn't necessarily like the hard gritty bit of training, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And mentioning 2020, and obviously don't really need to describe what happened in 2020, but was that almost a big reset for yourself as well in that way?
Yeah, I mean, I raced a little bit, didn't do very well. It was a really hard year for a lot of people, and I think and just it was difficult as an athlete because you don't have the same things to like aim for. Yeah, so I never got like because I never got those like really good performances, and it was a little disheartening. It really didn't like I did appreciate the regular runs more, just the everyday, because I wasn't getting those opportunities kind of throughout the season, because there wasn't really a season. So yeah, I think that contributed to it, but I also think there was a certain amount of like growth there, just like as you get older and more years doing this as a pro, those things all intersected, I think.
Yeah, no, I get that. And I mean, so many people often talk about breakthroughs and things like that with athletes, but maybe point to an event or point to a race, maybe it's a PB, whatever that is. But for you, is it maybe that appreciating training and really taking that on board? Is that maybe your breakthrough, if it's kind of fair to say that?
Yes and no. I think it's contributed. I wouldn't say I've had like my breakthrough yet, because
do you feel there's more to come?
I feel like there's so much more to come. Like I feel like that breakthrough hasn't happened, but I will say like my moments where I have had kind of like the really good races have been kind of where I've raced very like instinctually and I haven't overthought them. Like, so if I think back to European indoors in Poland, or even like in the races this year where like British champs, I raced very well, like instinctually. Rabat this year in the 3K, I raced very well instinctually. I think those races are the ones that I just haven't overthought, and like I've just responded, and I've almost raced in the way that I was when I was like a little kid again. So I think it's this towing this line between kind of almost racing like I did when I was little, and I just responded and didn't overthink it and didn't think about the pressure and all of those things, but also kind of marrying that with the patience and the appreciation for the everyday training. So I think it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, no, again, I get that. And I mean, again, kind of reading back a little bit to the start of the conversation where, you get the chance to actually look back and acknowledge what you've done. But I suppose, is there also a chance now to actually look back on what you enjoyed about those? Because, like I say, hectic schedule, but all great events to be a part of. And naturally, I'm sure everyone in this country will ask you about the Commonwealths, obviously it being in Birmingham in that fourth place. But is there a lot that you can take from just having those experiences now?
Yeah, so there's definitely things in the races themselves that I can take away. Like there's moments or decisions that I've made that I'm like, okay, I've learned from that. Like whether I, let a group go because I thought it was too fast and it wasn't, or if like I was saying at Rabat, when I raced very well instinctually, and the fact that I had a nerve to take the lead at a Diamond League with a lap to go, that was a huge kind of step for me because I didn't think twice. I just did it. And the fact that I did that, like I really enjoyed that experience. But there's also other pieces that really stick with you. Like I'm never going to forget how loud that final lap was in Birmingham. Like I thought my ears were going to pop like I was on an airplane or something. Like it was so loud. It was just deafening. And you're never going to forget that, the feeling that it gives you. But yeah, and then there's just the great experiences this year of being on 3 different teams with like obviously different people on each team, and that just being able to connect with those other athletes in different event groups and everything. Everyone has different perspectives, different types of training that works for them, different ways of approaching racing. Some people are really nervous, some people are really relaxed, and it's just like interesting being able to learn from other people as well throughout each of those championships. So yeah, it's been an amazing year. It's just and there's definitely been a lot of moments that you can like carry with you, but it was almost so hectic too. It's just like you don't realize that like how memorable it's actually going to be in the moment because it's just so hectic.
Yeah, and I suppose another example of just how you can utilize that time when it's not as hectic to actually look back on those things and appreciate them for what they were. Like I say, great experiences that just will live long in the memory, won't they?
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, and also like to think about them and think about the things where I felt, the times I fell short, right? And like what am I going to do next year to make sure that if I make another team that I wouldn't fall short in that way. So I think there's different definitely both the things that you can kind of reminisce on and think, okay, that was like a really good memory I want to use to fuel me in a positive way. But there's also the things that you can think about that are just going to kind of light a bit of a fire for next year as well.
And I mean, speaking of moments as well, I suppose lighting a fire, and I'd completely forgotten about this, but I remember at the time with what happened with your qualification for the Olympics. And again, to kind of briefly dumb it down, but essentially you nearly missed out on qualification because of some cones, which, I mean, for those who kind of aren't in the know, do you want to briefly explain how that happened? But I suppose, like I say, lighting a fire, but what it was like to go through in that whirlwind time. So I think it was 48 hours later or something like that, that it kind of got resolved, I suppose, and you got that place.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll explain in a second, but I didn't really realize at the time, just talking about how I didn't really fully appreciate Tokyo when I was there. And I think one of the reasons I didn't was I never had that moment at the trials when I crossed the line. I knew I qualified. And I feel like that was kind of stolen from me, which is a shame. But I mean, it all worked out in the end. But what happened basically was I was doing this race in Boston. It was a kind of more low-key race, but it had been approved for running times to run qualifying standard at. So we decided that because I had been just off the standard, that I was going to go and do this race before running the 10K European Cup the following week. And so when run this race, I ran the qualifying time, and then literally it was the day I was doing so well in training. I was really confident. I was like, okay, I've got the time. All I need to do in this at British Champs is I need to sit and kick, and I can do that. And I was so confident I could do that. And then I found out like the 2 days before, I think, I got a call from my coach now, Rob Denmark, actually. And he said, hey, Amy, I don't know if you've heard, but your time hasn't been ratified. Because basically there wasn't a rail, like a curb all the way around the track. So they had put cones out and it had been approved and whatever, but apparently they needed to be bricks, not cones. And this was on video as well, so you could see I never stepped once over the line as well, and it's not like I did it barely, like I was under by quite a few seconds. But basically, then I went to the trials, let it out from the front, was just off the qualifying time, got second, but didn't think I had the time, so didn't think I was going to go. And then last minute, right kind of towards the end of the selection meeting, I guess it came through and they ratified it. I think some people in Indianapolis ended up approving it because it was like a legit performance. So it was very stressful. Because for a couple of days after the trials, I knew I did everything that was required of me. Like I did exactly what the policy said. And you go to a start line and you don't think, oh, are there cones or are there bricks? Like, I don't know. You know what I mean? You don't know the ins and outs.
I don't know if that thought's ever entered anyone's mind.
Right. You just go to it. You might ask the question, okay, if I run a time here, will it count? But we asked that question and the answer was yes. So it's like we kind of did our due diligence on our end, and then it was very stressful. Anyway, worked out for the best, but it kind of did steal that moment from me. I always kind of wish I had that of like where you cross the line and you're like, I've made it. And yeah, I never really had that. But instead I had a phone call in the middle of a Scrabble game. So
it's your own unique way of finding out, I suppose. I suppose, does it, again, it's lighting that fire, but kind of add that extra determination that you will then get moments like that again that can't be taken away?
Yeah, so I think it added a bit of fuel to the fire for British Champs this year, because I wanted, no question, I wanted to make the team like on my own merit. And I like had the qualifying time going in. I knew all I needed to do is execute the race, and kind of execute the race that I wanted to run the previous year. So I think that's what felt so good crossing the line this year at British Champs, was just, realizing nobody was gonna question whether I'd run the qualifying standard, because I did it at the Olympic Games. So if they, I feel like that's pretty foolproof in terms of location. But yeah, it was just crossing the line and having that feeling of like, okay, I've made the World Champs team. Like that felt really good, because I didn't have that previous year.
Exactly, like you say, then that can't be taken away now. You've got that feeling.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, is like I said, when I've run every, like maybe not perform the way I wanted to do at each of the championships, but I've run every major senior championship now, and nobody can ever take that away, no matter what else I do in my career. And I think, I think it's important to appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely. Short question, but big question. What drives you?
I mean, probably the same thing that I answer that you get from a lot of athletes is I want to know what I can get out of myself. And I'd hate down the line, in how many years, if I think back and I wonder, what if I hadn't have given it a go? I mean, that's one of the reasons I wanted to run pro in the first place, was I didn't want to look at results and wonder, oh, where would I be if I had went for it in the end. So I think for me, it's just about getting the most out of myself and seeing the improvement. And that's one of the reasons, I switched my setup, and, training with Millie now is really exciting, because we can try and get the best out of each other each day. So as long as I'm seeing the progress, I think obviously you want to compete well against your competitors, and you do want to win. But if I'm getting better year on year, I can't complain about that. That's the goal, no matter what anyone else is doing.
Yeah, as that, I suppose, that self-determination always been there to some extent, because like I say, and maybe again, it's, I don't want to say ordinary people, but people who aren't in the competitive sports world, and maybe, we're also used to different fluctuations in self-motivation, and be it whatever part of life you're in. And I imagine it's probably still the same in an athlete world as well. There's bad days, there's great days. There's good days, there's in between days, but is that kind of that burning desire within you ultimately always there, and what keeps you pushing for more when those days aren't the best days?
And it's sometimes there's days where it's absolutely miserable out, and maybe you don't feel like getting out the door, and I do, because it's my job. And I always feel better for it. And that's another reason I do it. It's because I know I'm going to feel better for it, right? And I know it's going to help me get to my end goal, which I am going to enjoy. So, I mean, there are days where you're just getting it done. But I think the reason I'm getting it done is because I just, I love what I do, and I want to get the best out of myself. And it's pretty simple at the end of the day. If I don't do it, I'm not going to be able to get the most out of myself. So, I think it's changed as I've gotten older. I think some of the fire when I was younger used to be a bit more, or a lot more, based on like comparison to what other people were doing. So performances relative to other people. Whereas like where I am now, it's like, obviously, like I said, I want to go into a race, I want to win, I want to compete. But I can evaluate my performance not just by comparison to other people. And I think that's important as well, in terms of just like longevity in the sport, both physically and mentally, is I'm not just like comparing myself to other people. I'm doing what I need to do because I love it and because I want to see where it can take me, versus I want to do it because I feel like I need to replicate what someone else is doing or improve upon that, so obviously there's elements of competitiveness, and we want to make teams, we want to win, but at the end of the day, how I feel about what I'm doing is based on how I feel about what I'm doing and the progress that I'm making. It's not because I'm just motivated to by like that comparison factor.
Yeah, and probably a really important and positive message that a lot of people need to hear, because you think how easy it is for anybody to compare themselves to anyone else on this planet when you've got social media as a factor, and all sorts of things, whether it's just people you see on TV. And imagine that's like you say, it's just a really positive mentality when you can focus on yourself and what you're doing, and if you can see yourself bettering your results and improving, then that's ultimately what matters, rather than comparing yourself to other athletes here, there and everywhere.
I think it's important, especially because people take different amounts, they take different routes to get to where they
no one journey is the same,
right? And I think that's a huge bit in terms of age as well. Some people progress really quickly when they're younger, some people take a lot of time to kind of reach their like highest potential, and you can't, just because you haven't achieved something when you're 20 doesn't mean that everyone else has achieved, doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to run faster than them when you're 30, for instance. And I think it goes the same for just like in terms of people comparing bodies and like what they think they should look like to be a certain speed. Like, that's not the way it works. And I think people get caught up in comparing kind of the aesthetics or the results or kind of all of these things that don't really matter in terms of your like long-term potential, even if they feel important in the moment. So I think for me, it's just so important to just focus on what I'm doing, and make some comparisons when they're helpful, because some certain times that they are, but not being obsessed about what somebody else did when they were 21, or and then assuming that that's going to dictate what I'm doing now.
Yeah, and again, a lot of positive messages for life there. And I think of someone like Beth Dobbin, who her trajectory was relatively shallow for starters, and then just clicked. And then those times started to come, and she broke the record of however many years ago it was now, the Scottish 200-meter record, and something like that. Like I say, no one person's journey is the same. I was going to say as well, obviously your husband's an athlete as well, a rower. Does it almost help as well when you've got those people around you who get it, get what it's like to
Yeah.
be an athlete, where you can have those days where you just want to rant and they just understand.
Yeah, I mean, he gets it. I mean, that's so important. He gets that I have to live the lifestyle, you know. He gets that I go to bed at 9 o'clock pretty much every night, like and I'm up early to get ready for training. Understands that, like, how important the fueling is and all of those sorts of things. And he understands, if I need to go to altitude for a month, like, I'm going to have to go to altitude for a month. And so, and he's supportive of that, because he's been there and he's competitive himself. So, the fact that, Yana knows what it's like, obviously in a different sport, although I will say I've kind of converted him into a runner now. It's been really nice for me to have a bit of more company on some of my runs. It's so important having people around you that just understand it and you don't have to explain it to them. It's like,
Exactly.
I've got a long run the next morning, and like, I'm, do you mind to have chicken and rice tonight? like it's not like, it's even simple things like that. He's like, oh yeah, that's fine. Or just even shifting around, like when we're meeting up with people, if Wednesday's easier because I have a rest day on a Thursday, then we'll do that. It's just, it would take things in stride a bit more and a bit more flexible. Just on the everyday, so I don't have to overthink those things.
Exactly. I think something like that, like I say, can be small things, can be big things, but they do make a big difference. And I see that even with my partner, journalist as well. She wants to rant at me about an interviewee that's not getting back to her, or a deadline that's looming and nothing's coming together. I get it. Vice versa, she gets it as well. So it does go a long way. We touched on it a little bit at the start already, but kind of looking ahead to 2023, and obviously new training program that you're on, and with everything that you have achieved, what are you kind of looking for in 2023, whether it's as advanced as setting goals for yourself, or just, again, wanting to see that positive trajectory above all else?
Yeah, so I think the positive trajectory is always the important thing, right? And understanding that it's probably not going to be linear throughout the season. But I think the biggest things in terms of goals for next year, I mean, above all else, it's about, making teams. So, I mean, we're focused on trying to make that European indoor team because I'd like to defend my title. And then going into outdoor season as well, looking towards world champs. I'd struggled with the heat this past year at world champs. I don't think I realized how delirious I was at the time, but I did a BBC interview that I don't remember doing, to put it in perspective. Like,
that does.
I was just so, like, I feel like I never had the opportunity to really test myself, just because my body shut down in the heat that day. So I'd really love to kind of make a team and have a second chance at performing at world champs. And obviously I have some big goals in terms of times and things like that. But I think at the end of the day, I just want to run some races that I'm proud of. And sometimes the ones you're most proud of aren't the fastest ones. Maybe you took a risk in them in a different way, or it's just a feeling you get. And as long as I'm racing, I feel like I've put everything out there on the line, and I did everything that I could. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like I say, that positive mindset, good things will more than likely come off the back of that as well. Taking the clock back to a certain extent, just so people can, I suppose, can understand, where you've come from, but what running ultimately means to you as well. And I think I'm right in saying you moved to the States at the age of 2, so quite young, and then started to get into running around 6. As kind of at that age, can you kind of describe what it was that just hooked you, and what it was about it that, I suppose, grabbed you from the instance?
I think so when I went, we had a family friend, I think, who was looking after me that day, and their daughter was going to the track there because she was on a team, and I think I went with her, and I just kind of wanted to keep going. And I don't remember a lot about those when I first decided to I want to keep going, because I was so young at the time. but I do. I think I just felt comfortable though. I was quite shy as a child, and I think like when I was really young, and I think like you kind of tap into the things that you're quite good at. And for me, I was always one of the quickest. When we're outside playing and everything, and I was running around and I was faster than the boys and that sort of thing. So I think I really like grasped onto that as like something that made me feel a bit empowered, and just made me feel a bit more confident. So yeah, I think that's the biggest thing that probably attracted to me when I was younger. And then yeah, as I got older, it kind of grew with me, and turned out I was like pretty good at it. And yeah, I think there was times when like I struggled with the sport, and like for instance, when I was like at the University of Washington, I got really injured when I was there, and like I kind of really thought like, do I want to keep doing this? Am I going to race again? I don't know. Like I just get an injury after injury. So we definitely had like ups and downs of the sport, but at the end of the day, I think it really, like I made the decision several times that I wanted to do it for me. And then that's helped, I think helps motivate me now, right? Because I made the choice to keep going and find out what I could do.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think all along the way, though, yeah, the biggest thing as a child, though, it just, I think it gave me confidence, and I think I just enjoyed the feeling of running, and yeah, I'm feeling fast. I don't know, it's a kind of a bit exhilarating, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, that so many examples of that, and I think back to when Mallory Franklin, canoeist, of course, won silver out in Tokyo, was on this podcast, and she said that she was the kid who'd never say yes to the register. Like that's the level of shyness she had at the time. And that, my next question was like, how important was sport to you and kind of shaping who you grew up into being? And imagine that self-confidence and getting that confidence off the back of sport is a big part of that.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it helped me, especially like in high school, it helped me kind of come out of my shell a little bit more, and I became a lot more social. I think part of that was having a team. Was really, it gave me that social interaction versus, when I have a tendency to kind of just be by myself. I think I'm like one of those people that I like need the social interaction, but I don't know I need it until I haven't had it for a while. So yeah, I think by having like teammates, I think it's just so valuable when you're younger. It just like it forces you to learn how to communicate, and yeah, and I think especially because I didn't have loads of coordination, so anything with a ball and things wasn't gonna be the best sport for me. So I think it was a great way to me to kind of use my talents, but not like isolate myself at the same time.
No, absolutely. And then kind of very loosely, but I was just wondering, like off the bat, like obviously being out in the US and what kind of opportunity that presents itself to you. So I think so many people can get caught up in sort of the collegiate system, and obviously everyone thinks about NFL and basketball, baseball, that kind of thing. But whether that presented any particular opportunities for you to get to where you are.
Yeah, so because I was quite good in high school. I was fortunate enough to go to the University of Washington on scholarship, which is huge. And so I was able to get, first and foremost, I was able to get a really good education, kind of because of my running, which was huge, and being able to compete at the NCAA level. Because I mean, when I got it was 2017 when I got second at NCAA cross, and that was kind of the year that opened up the doors for me to run professionally. And then I had the opportunity to join the Reebok group that I was with until I moved out here, and that was a huge opportunity for me. I would say I don't think the NCAA collegiate system is necessary to find those opportunities, and it comes with a lot of downsides as well. So it's not right for everyone. I wouldn't say that, you know, everyone needs, if they want a chance running professionally or being successful, everyone doesn't need to do it. I mean, we've had plenty of athletes out of the UK who have done amazingly without entering that system. So I wouldn't say it's like it wasn't necessary. I don't know how my life would have ended up if I didn't go into it.
Is there a certain type of, sorry to interrupt, but is there a certain type of person that it suits, if that makes sense? I don't know if that's, you know, getting really deep, but if you know what I mean, just whether a certain characteristics of someone where that kind of system really suits, and maybe vice versa.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a certain type of person. I think you just need to have a good, you need to be in the place that is the right fit for you, because lots of the schools are very, very different, have different cultures and things. I would say, especially I think for female athletes, it can be quite toxic. Lots of teams have people on their teams that struggle with eating issues and things like that. And you have to be quite resilient in a way. And, but also like holding yourself accountable to be doing what's right for you, and also being able to take accountability. I think there's so many people that join a team and then they'll blame their coach or blame all these other parts of their life for like a bad performance, where I think it's really important just to be able to take accountability for a performance that didn't go your way. Maybe there were factors that contributed to it, but really taking accountability for the things that you did have control over in that moment. And I think if you haven't learned to do that, it's really easy to kind of get lost in that system. So yeah, I'm not sure it means it like requires a certain type of person. I think it just I think you do have to be quite resilient though, because it is a relatively like high pressured environment for people who aren't professionals. You know, you're 18 years old and you've got a lot of pressure on you because, you know, there's the NCAA, people are obsessed with it. So
so I suppose how you demand to a pressurized situation like that, or how you adapt to it.
Yeah. And most people, when they are 18, they don't know how to do that yet. And so it's about having the people around you who are going to help you figure out how to do that, and who you can be honest with and confide in and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure I knew how to do that getting into my 20s. So
we're still learning. So.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who, we're all still learning ultimately. We'll never stop learning. It's kind of on that note, but because you touched on kind of women's sport there, and I've done so many interviews in the last few weeks, which have been so many positive women's sports stories when you look at what's happened in the last few months. When Lioness in the summer, Amy-Eloise Markovc and what she did at the Commonwealth and winning BT Actual Woman of the Year last night. Even Muirhead in the curling as another example from the Winter Olympics back in February. You forget how much has actually happened in this year. For you, obviously, as a woman in sport, do you kind of feel that momentum, feel it going into a positive place, and maybe feel that you're part of it and have a part to play in it as well?
Yeah, I think it's a cool time to be in the sport. I think there's more and more opportunities for women to have longer careers as well, which is huge. I think there was a time in the sport where, women had to choose between families and running, and they did one or the other, whereas now you see a lot of women having both and then still competing and doing really, really well in the long term. So I think that's really exciting to see, and there's a lot more support happening from separate, like outside organizations, but also like certain sponsors are getting behind maternity rights in sport, and I think that's really important to see, because I think it's important that younger women, who aren't at that phase of their life, like can look ahead and see that, and see that they can have sport in their life long term, that it's not just while they're young until the age, so I think that's really important, and I think just getting a bit more coverage as well is huge. I mean, we see that time and time again where there's like a marathon on, and then I'm so excited to see the women's race, and the women's race is like barely on. We've definitely had a few like that this year, but it's also, we're having the marathons where there is a lot more women's coverage and things like that. So I think it is exciting on both ends. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. still. But if young women can see athletes, trying to compete at the highest level, I think that's really important. So even if there's like one girl who looks at what I'm doing and thinks, oh, that's pretty cool, maybe I want to give it a go. Like, I think that's, it's been worth it for me.
Yeah, must be the best thing. Like I say, you got to see it to be it. So now it gets mentioned a lot, but there's so much truth in it. Ultimately.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I'm not saying that like girls do look up to me and say that. I think it would be pretty cool if they did, but I'm not saying I just know how important it was for me to start seeing like women running professionally and things before I knew that was a possibility.
Yeah. It brings me on to my next one as well, is that, did you have a particular role model person that you really sort of looked up to when you're trying to forge your own running career as well?
Well, I think I don't know if there was necessarily one, but I know Kelly Holmes was such a huge name in the sport in a time when women's sport wasn't as big.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I think even just thinking for me of like how cool it is that women's steeplechase is so competitive now. Whereas like how many was it, 5 cycles ago or so that it wasn't even in the Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
For women. Like I think it's even things like that which and seeing there's so many athletes that kind of have come out of the woodwork in events that women literally weren't allowed to do for such a long time. So seeing them be successful and I think just like when I was younger, I didn't necessarily follow sport a ton. I was kind of just doing what I was doing, but I had people in my life that encouraged me to do it. So I didn't necessarily need to be watching sport to be able to feel like it was an opportunity. But I know there's so many people that don't have that, who, they need to be seeing what people are doing on the, the senior championship level to be able to kind of feel like it could be an opportunity for them.
Yeah, and you mentioned the coverage side of things there as well, in terms of helping to grow those sports. Again, if you can put it into people's living rooms on their TV and things like that, or if you can read about them, it does so much in terms of pushing a sport to new audiences and getting them to actually see it. Is that one of the main things, or is there anything else that you think can be not so much changed, but really pushed, developed to really get women's sport continue the growth, I suppose? Because while it's great to see where it is now, and I know there were statistics that came out last week from BBC Sport and the Women's Sports Trust about the millions of people extra watching, but I suppose it's important not to just be satisfied with that and to always want more.
Yeah, so I think the coverage is huge, because the fact of the matter is, without the coverage and without the interest, like we won't get the funding, and that funding can't be just reinvested in those women's sport teams at like the pro level. They're not going to be invested at the grassroots level either. Like and the more people we get interested, it's just a cycle. But I think there's also a lot of work to do in terms of the amount of research that's done on women's sport. Is improving, but there's for so long there's been just research that has been done on males, and then it's just been applied to women as like, oh, this is a training benefit, and then it applies to women. And when you can't just generalize those results to a completely different population of people. And I think in terms, there's just so many physiological differences, not just in terms of like the way like our bodies are like structured, but also in terms of hormone levels and everything. So I think the more research that's done on women relative to sport, we're going to learn more that's going to be able to help us maximize our performances, stay healthier in the long term, so that women can stay in the sport long term as well. Because we see this so many times, like the dropout rate for women is huge as well. So yeah, I think it's just so important to just even like do the research so we have the information, but then also finding ways to integrate that into like education, so like like women can have a better understanding of their bodies and how to like integrate that into sports, and so they stay with it in the long term.
Yeah, and I recalling two stories off the top of my head from probably the last couple of weeks, and there's a story about women's football players, and because they're predominantly wearing boots designed for men, that's what causes such a high level of injury in that side of football. And then I even look at I think Amy-Eloise Markovc was one of the many athletes who were kind of calling for greater research into periods and what that does to performance. And like I say, is that research and that education probably part of the key for retaining so many girls who might drop out of it? And maybe you can speak from personal experience about what you knew at that time about different aspects of your body that might affect your performance in one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm only really in recent years have really understood, like, oh, I could actually be maximizing the adaptations and things that I can get from training, like if I pay a little bit more attention, so I can preempt when I'm not going to feel as good, or when my sleep isn't going to be quite as good, and that sort of thing, so that we can then prepare for it and accommodate it. And so I understand if I'm warming up for a race and I just feel terrible, that my fitness hasn't disappeared overnight. It's just that my hormone levels are at a different point, and I'm going to feel more fatigued, even if I'm like not actually fatigued from training and all that sort of thing. So if I can understand it, I can push through it in a different way. Whereas when I was younger, like we wouldn't talk about it at all, right? And like I feel like periods just ignored. You just pretend you didn't have them. Coaches wouldn't want to know. They wouldn't know how to talk about it, even if they felt comfortable doing so. So I think a big part of it is also getting that education on the coaches' side. So kind of, it's hard. It's a hard topic, right? Because they don't know how, it's so personal that they don't know what they can talk about, or what they like parents would be comfortable talking about with them with. But I think it's just even having the educational level on the coach's side is so crucial, because there are like really important changes in our physiology like throughout a month that needs to be taken into account, and also certain accommodations that that probably should be like considered, especially with like grassroots sports. I think I was listening to a podcast, I think it was on the Female Athlete podcast, and they were talking like, it's ridiculous that you have like women's sports meeting and there's like no toilets or anything. Like where, if you're just meeting in the park somewhere, and there's, that puts kids in a pretty, if they're not comfortable, puts them in a pretty difficult situation.
Exactly.
And they would just not go if they were on their period. Right. So I think it's even things like that, is just having great education on the coaching side of things, so they can make a structure and around their training group or their team, where like girls feel like they can always show up no matter what. And, if something happens, like it's not going to be the biggest deal in the world because everyone understands. Yeah. So
I was going to say, does it feel like not so much that acknowledgement that needs to happen is there? Because I think there's probably a lot of people who obviously acknowledge that needs to change, but it is actually changing it. Like say, stuff has been, that kind of conversation has been so taboo for so long that, it's overcoming that, isn't it? And I suppose actions speaking louder than words, and people actually need to take these things on board.
Yeah, I think the conversation is starting, which is helping, right? And I think that's a conversation starting. It doesn't change everything, but it's definitely a starting point. And I think it's even people like myself, I catch myself sometimes like tiptoeing around the issue with certain people, and then I'm like, oh, why am I tiptoeing around it if they can't handle like the fact that half the world's population has a period, and that there's hormonal fluctuations and all of this sort of stuff, and how like if they can't handle that, then that's not my problem. And so sometimes I even catch myself being like, no, I can be polite and consider it, but I don't need to kind of be I don't need to treat the topic like it's taboo, because it's not. So I think it's even little things like that. And then I think just on the, I'm just glad there's a bigger conversation happening around like fueling and women's periods, and knowing that if you're a female athlete and you're missing your period, it's not normal. It's could be an issue to do with fueling. It could be an issue to do with something else, but you need to go get that looked at, and you need to talk to a medical professional, and you need to have a look at what's going on in terms of long-term health. So I think that's another really important, if not more, personally, I think it's probably more important conversation that's happening as well, because I think people are becoming a little bit more aware of that. But because there's so many people that just think it's normal.
Yeah, and like I say, wholeheartedly back that, because what I interviewed Issy Morris, Welsh triathlete, who was diagnosed with RED-S a couple of years ago. So we did an interview about that exact thing, and just how important it is to actually raise awareness of it, because it is, honestly, you don't realise if you're not within it how little is known about it. And, from a GP perspective, for example, and it's only really sports specialists who know what the signs are, how to diagnose it, and like I say, treating periods as something that should happen, it's normal. I think goes such a long way. But for some reason, like I say, the topic has been so taboo for so long. For some reason, it feels like it would take a little bit of time for that to become normal, even though it should be normal, because like I say, half the world's population has periods.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just the more people know, the more information that they have, the more likely that women are going to be able to take action that's going to be able to keep them in sport longer, which is just, it's so huge to just your physical health, your mental well-being. It's everything. Like, obviously I'm a bit biased. I'm like, I do sport as my job. So of course I'm going to be promoting it. But I think just the longer that we can keep kids engaged with sport, the better. And I think just having more resources to kind of all, like, whether that's athletes or parents or coaches, I think that's just so important.
Yeah, exactly. And we are all fine with you being biased on this podcast. Like I say, set up, even though we're by no means athletes, but sport's given us a lot in our lives. It's given me my career as well. So we'll happily bang on about the importance of sport as well. My final one for you, and kind of short-term outlook, obviously Christmas is coming up as well, but what does the next month or so look like for you in terms of schedule? Like what's your kind of routine, I suppose, when you're going into a new year and with those aims and achievements that you kind of got for yourself?
Yeah, so it's a big block of winter training right now. So it's just we've got a lot of aerobic work. We've got hills, kind of longer grass reps and things like that. I think we'll get onto the track finally a bit in early December, probably. So, but that kind of depends on how racing goes. We're going to do Liverpool on the 26th, I believe, of November. And then depending on how that goes, European cross country is in the beginning of December, which is kind of the aim for this fall. But then we'll go into, Christmas, and then we're going to go to altitude for a month. So, basically just really just training hard, and excited to see family over Christmas and things. And it's nice. We've got quite a few things to kind of break up the hard blocks of training, whether that's racing or whether that's Christmas time. And then we'll get some altitude and some sun in January. So that'll be nice.
Yeah, I mean, when January comes around, altitude and sun, certainly something that I think people could do with. I mean, ultimately, thank you so much, Amy, again, for coming on to the podcast. I really enjoyed that chat. I think God knows how many topics we covered, but
we jumped around a little bit.
Exactly. But I always think there's so much value in that as well. And, if you take the final conversation as an example, just by having those conversations and by someone listening to them can often prompt another conversation later down the line. And I'll say as well, good luck with 2023. Like, if the positive trajectory keeps on going, then I'm sure there'll be lots of exciting things to see. We'll certainly be backing you, and I know of a lot of British athletics fans as well will be backing you as well when we get to see you on track next year. So thank you again for coming on.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed having a conversation.
A huge thank you to Amy for taking the time out to talk to us on Sports Spiel. Those are the types of interviews we love to do, and for me, she's showcased how much she cares about her sport, as well as wanting to push forward positive messages for others. No doubt we'll be keeping an eye on how she does in 2023, and we of course wish her all the very best of luck. Thank you, listeners, as ever, for tuning into the show. We're delighted to be back, and with this new series, we'll be bringing you another interview in just a week's time. You can follow us on social media to keep updated on everything. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram. All of our handles are SportsBillPod. And of course, if you want to drop us a line, our email is sportsbillpod@gmail.com. Please spread the word if you can, as we try to showcase as many brilliant athletes as we can. We care about sharing their stories properly, and the more people who can see it, then the more positivity that can spread. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. We'll see you very, very soon.